You know how it is you're trying to really focus, maybe dig into some research or, I don't know, finally wrap your head around a new concept, but your attention just feels like it's being pulled in a dozen different
Right.
directions.
Absolutely.
Every notification, every single wandering thought, it feels like a constant uphill battle.
Yeah,
Well, today on the deep dive, we're tackling that struggle head on.
exactly. We've really immersed ourselves in Nir Eyal's book, Indistractable. Now, you might remember his earlier work, Hooked, which was all about habit formation.
Right, how products get us hooked.
Yeah, and this book is kind of the flip side, how we can regain control of our own attention in this age of, well, endless stimulation.
So think of this as your direct route to becoming more focused. Our goal, really, in this deep dive is to pull out the most valuable, the most practical insights from Indistractable.
Mm-hmm.
We want to equip you with strategies to actually command your attention, whether you're aiming to master a new subject, be more present in your life, or, simply get things done without that constant mental tug of war.
And Eyal lays out a really interesting framework to help us do just that.
Yeah, he does. What's the structure?
It really revolves around 4 key areas, and we're going to explore each one. First, understanding and navigating those internal urges, those feelings that often lead us straight to distraction.
Okay.
Second, proactively carving out time for what he calls traction. Those are the actions that actually propel us forward towards what we want.
Traction, okay. Got it.
Third, strategically minimizing the impact of all those external triggers out there vying for our attention. Pings, dings, all that.
Usual suspects.
Right. And finally, using pre-commitments, or PACs, as he calls them, to really strengthen our focus and make it harder to get off track.
Okay, PACs. Interesting.
Mhm.
Let's dive into those internal triggers first then, because it turns out maybe those buzzing notifications aren't actually the root of the problem.
Yeah, that's what's really insightful here. Eyal's argument is that distraction frequently originates not from the outside world, but from our own internal discomfort.
Discomfort. Like what?
Well, it could be boredom, stress, maybe anxiety, any feeling we'd rather avoid, really. So distraction becomes a way to temporarily escape that feeling.
Huh. He even kicks off the book with a story, doesn't he? Something quite personal.
He does, and it's one many of us can probably relate to. He was with his young daughter. She was sharing something really important to her, and he just completely missed it. Why?
Let me guess, his phone.
Exactly. He got sucked into checking his email or some notification, and this is the guy who literally wrote Hooked, the book about how tech grabs our attention.
Wow. So even he wasn't immune.
Not at all. And he says that moment really sparked his whole exploration into how we can become more indistractable. It really makes you think, if even he struggled, it's a pretty universal challenge.
Definitely.
And it perfectly illustrates this key distinction Eyal draws between traction and distraction.
Right. You mentioned traction earlier.
Yeah. Traction are those intentional actions, the things that move us towards our goals and align with our values, what we intend to do. Distraction, on the other hand, well, that's anything that pulls us away from our intentions. Those impulsive escapes.
So like wanting to learn a new language, that's traction. But then spending the time you set aside for study just scrolling through news headlines.
That's distraction. Exactly. Pulling you off course.
Right. And Eyal makes this really compelling point that underneath a lot of these distractions is this desire to just avoid feeling bad somehow.
He puts it quite directly, actually. Time management is pain management.
Pain management. Wow.
Yeah. So those moments when we reflexively reach for our phone or suddenly find ourselves deep down some internet rabbit hole, they might actually be attempts to cope with some underlying discomfort. We're trying to soothe ourselves.
That's a different way of looking at it. It's not just laziness or lack of willpower then.
Not necessarily. Think about someone facing, say, a challenging research paper. That feeling of stress, maybe overwhelm about where to even start.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
That feeling might lead them to just endlessly browse social media instead. It offers this, temporary relief from the anxiety, right? But it doesn't actually address the task or the stress that comes with it.
And it probably makes the stress worse later on.
It usually does. So if our distractions are these little coping mechanisms, it really makes you wonder about the kinds of pressures, the kinds of discomforts we're all dealing with in our daily lives that make us seek those escapes so often.
Okay, so what can we actually do about these internal triggers then? I mean, we could just switch off our feelings, can we?
No, absolutely not. And Eyal doesn't suggest that. But the crucial first step he emphasizes is becoming aware of these triggers, noticing them, and importantly, doing it without judgment.
Without judgment. That sounds hard.
It can be, but he suggests maybe keeping a simple log. When you find yourself distracted, just quickly note down, what were you doing? What were you feeling right before you got distracted? What was the emotion or sensation that prompted you to reach for that escape?
Like being a detective of your own mind again.
Kind of, yeah. So someone might realize, hey, I consistently check my email whenever I feel uncertain about what to do next on a project. Once that pattern emerges, then they can start to experiment. Okay, next time I feel uncertain, instead of email, maybe I'll take a moment to just clarify the next step or ask a question.
Okay, so noticing the urge, logging it, finding the pattern. That's the first part.
Yep.
But how do we actually shift the behavior in that moment? From awareness to actually doing something different.
Right. This is where his strategy of reimagining the internal trigger comes in. Instead of automatically giving in to that feeling of discomfort with a distraction, Eyal suggests trying to approach it with curiosity.
Curiosity, how does that work?
So let's take that student we mentioned earlier, the one feeling bored during study time. Instead of immediately grabbing their phone, they could pause and ask themselves, okay, what specifically about this feels boring right now? Is there maybe a different angle I could take? Could I connect this to something I am interested in?
So you engage with the feeling instead of running away.
Exactly. That small shift from avoidance to just being curious, asking a question, can be surprisingly effective in redirecting your attention back to where you want it.
That's a really interesting reframe. And he also talks about something called temptation bundling.
Oh,
That sounds intriguing. Like
yeah.
working with our desires, not always against them.
It is. It's quite clever. Temptation bundling is basically linking an activity you might be avoiding maybe because it feels difficult or unpleasant with something you genuinely enjoy and look forward to.
Give me an example.
Okay, say someone knows they really should exercise, but they always find an excuse not to. They might decide, right, I can only listen to my absolute favorite podcast while I'm working out.
I see. So you pair the necessary task, the should, with the enjoyable one, the want.
Precisely. It makes the less appealing activity much more enticing because it comes packaged with something good.
That's a smart way to kind of leverage our existing motivations. Now, one idea in this whole section on internal triggers that really, really resonated with me was the discussion around how we label ourselves.
Ugh.
That whole, oh, I'm just not a focused person narrative.
Yes, that's such a critical point. Eyal argues that adopting a belief like I'm bad at focus can easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How so?
Well, it creates this kind of fixed mindset, right? That actually hinders our ability to improve because we've already decided we can't. He encourages us instead to cultivate what he calls an indistractable identity.
An indistractable identity. Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly? Is it about pretending?
Not pretending, no. It isn't about expecting instant perfection overnight. It's more about starting to see yourself as someone who is actively working on controlling their attention, someone who is building that muscle of focus through consistent, maybe small steps.
So it's more about the journey, the effort.
Exactly. It's about the direction you're heading in, not about being flawless from day one. Believing you can become indistractable is a key part of actually doing it.
Okay, wow. So we've explored what's happening inside us, those internal triggers that can lead us astray. Now let's move on to the second pillar of Eyal's model. Making time for traction. This sounds more proactive, like taking charge of our schedule.
Precisely. Once we gain some understanding of those internal drivers of distraction, the next logical, proactive step is to intentionally schedule time for traction. Remember, those are the activities aligned with our core values, the things that help us make actual progress towards our significant goals.
So it's about shifting from just reacting all day.
Exactly, reacting to whatever pops up, to actually designing our time more deliberately, taking control.
And he breaks this down into scheduling time across 3 important areas of our lives, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He emphasizes making time for 3 key domains: you, relationships, and work.
You, relationships, work. Okay.
And it's quite interesting that he specifically highlights prioritizing you time first.
Really, before work or relationships, that sounds a bit selfish.
Well, he argues it isn't about being selfish in a negative way. It's about recognizing that our own well-being, our personal growth, our self-care, these things are fundamental. They're the foundation. And they shouldn't be perpetually sacrificed just because of external demands.
Okay, I can see that. If you're burned out, you're no good to anyone else either.
Right. So think about someone trying to learn a new skill. Scheduling dedicated time for practice each day isn't just me time. It's an investment in their you domain that ultimately benefits other areas of their life as well.
So it's not just about blocking out time for, work meetings and deadlines, but also consciously making space for things like exercise or hobbies or learning something new or even just quiet reflection.
Exactly. All of that falls under you. And another key point Eyal suggests here is shifting our focus when scheduling, instead of solely scheduling the desired outcome.
Like finished presentation.
Yeah, exactly. Which can feel really overwhelming, right? And it often depends on external factors you can't fully control. Instead, he says, schedule the effort involved.
Schedule the effort. What does that look like?
So instead of finished presentation, you might schedule work on presentation for 2 hours. This focuses on the actions you do have direct control over, showing up and putting in the time.
Ah, okay. So someone aiming to write a book might schedule daily writing blocks for, say, 90 minutes.
Rather than just having this vague, looming goal of finish chapter, which can lead to procrastination because it feels too big, scheduling the input makes it feel more manageable.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. It takes the pressure off getting the immediate result and helps you focus on just doing the work, making progress bit by bit.
Mm-hmm.
And he also stresses scheduling time for our relationships. That's something that, wow, can easily get pushed to the back burner when life gets busy.
Oh, absolutely crucial. We often, intellectually acknowledge how important our connections are, but how often do we truly treat them as a priority by actively dedicating specific time to nurture them?
Guilty as charged, probably.
Many of us are. Eyal really emphasizes the significance of intentionally scheduling time for family, for friends, to truly honor those bonds. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as a family deciding, right, every Wednesday night is game night, no devices allowed. It's scheduled.
It's about bringing that same level of intentionality we often reserve for our professional commitments into our personal lives.
Exactly. And this principle of scheduled traction, it extends right into the workplace too, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, Eyal discusses the real advantages of aligning schedules with colleagues. If you can create protected blocks of focus time for everyone and foster clearer expectations around when people are generally available versus when they're deep in work.
Then maybe fewer interruptions.
But that's the idea. If a team agrees, say, that mornings are for deep work where interruptions are minimized unless truly urgent, it can significantly boost overall productivity and, importantly, reduce that feeling of constant mental fragmentation. Everyone knows the score.
Okay, so we've looked inside ourselves at internal triggers, and we've talked about structuring our time for traction. Now we move on to part 3.
Mm-hmm.
Hacking back those external triggers, the things outside us that are constantly vying for our attention.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably what most people immediately think of when they hear the word distractions.
It's definitely the most visible layer of the problem, isn't it? All those pings, the notifications, the colleague tapping you on the shoulder, all the interruptions coming from the outside.
Yeah.
And Eyal kicks off this section by posing a really important, quite critical question we should probably ask ourselves regularly about any external trigger we encounter.
What's the question?
Simply, is this serving me or am I serving it?
Ooh, I like that. Is this serving me or am I serving it? That really flips the script.
It does. It forces us to consciously evaluate whether that notification, that interruption, that constant checking, is it actually adding value to our lives or our work, or is it just hijacking our focus for its own ends, so to speak?
It puts us back in the driver's seat, or at least it encourages us to grab the wheel. So what are some of the practical strategies he suggests for dealing with these common workplace interruptions, like the shoulder tap you mentioned?
Yeah, for those in-person interruptions, he recommends using clear visual cues to signal when you need uninterrupted focus time. Something as straightforward as putting on headphones, even if you're not listening to anything.
Ah, the universal do not disturb sign.
Exactly. It can be a very clear signal to colleagues that you're in a period of concentration and would prefer not to be disturbed unless it's really important. It sets a boundary without you having to constantly say, I'm busy.
That's a pretty universally understood signal in most places now. Okay, what about the absolute bane of many people's existence, the relentless stream of emails that can just derail an entire day?
Oh, email. Yeah. Eyal strongly advises scheduling specific blocks of time throughout the day to check and respond to emails rather than constantly reacting to every single new message the moment it arrives.
Batching it, basically.
Essentially, yes. He also suggests utilizing things like filters and folders much more aggressively to prioritize important communications and just reduce the sheer visual clutter of your inbox. It's all about taking control of when and how you engage with email rather than letting it dictate your entire schedule.
Instead of being Pavlov's dog responding to the email chime.
Precisely. And, in today's hyper-connected world, group chats, Slack, Teams, whatever you use, they've become another major source of constant notifications and, let's be honest, distractions.
Tell me about it. Sometimes it feels like a nonstop conversation you can't escape.
Totally. So his recommendation here is pretty direct. Ruthlessly mute notifications for non-essential channels. You probably don't need to know every time someone posts a GIF in the random channel.
Probably not.
And also, crucially, work with your team to establish clear communication norms. Does every message truly require an immediate response? Probably not. Setting those expectations up front can significantly reduce that feeling of being constantly on call and needing to monitor every single conversation in real time.
Setting boundaries, basically.
Yeah.
What about meetings? They often feel like a huge time sink, a massive distraction from actually getting work done.
Meetings are a big one. Eyal advocates for a much more critical approach to meeting attendance. Before accepting, ask yourself, is my presence truly necessary? Will I add value or gain essential information I can't get otherwise?
And if the answer is no,
don't hesitate to decline politely or suggest you get the notes afterwards. For the meetings you do attend, push for shorter durations. Does it really need to be an hour? And insist on a clear, focused agenda beforehand to maximize efficiency and minimize that horrible feeling of wasted time.
good advice. Now let's talk about the devices that are practically glued to our hands, our smartphones. They are just a massive source of external triggers for so many of us.
They really are, aren't they? And Eyal offers several really actionable tips here for managing smartphone distractions. One big one. Remove the most distracting apps, especially things like social media, news apps from your phone's home screen.
Make it harder to access them.
Exactly. Add that extra step, that friction. Make it a conscious choice to open them, not just a mindless tap, because the icon is right there. He also recommends turning off as many non-essential notifications as humanly possible. Do you really need your phone to buzz every time someone likes your photo?
Probably not. It can wait.
It can definitely wait. And making deliberate use of do not disturb mode during focused work periods or during family time or even just when you're reading that can create these incredibly valuable pockets of truly uninterrupted attention. The goal is to make your phone a tool that you use intentionally when you choose, rather than something that constantly grabs your focus.
Those are all really practical steps, things people can actually do today. And it's not just our phones, is it? Our computer desktops can be just as bad, just as cluttered with potential distractions.
Oh, absolutely. Simple actions like just getting into the habit of closing unnecessary tabs in your browser.
Yeah.
How many of us have dozens open right now?
Yeah, guilty.
Me too sometimes. And disabling those desktop notifications, the little banners that constantly pop up in the corner of your screen, those small changes can have a surprisingly positive impact on your ability to just concentrate. It's about creating a less visually noisy, less audibly noisy digital environment.
Quieting the digital noise. He also mentions using apps like Pocket or Instapaper to save interesting online articles for later. I've personally found that to be incredibly helpful.
It's a fantastic strategy, yeah. When you stumble across an interesting article or video online, but you know engaging with it right now will derail you.
Down the rabbit hole you go.
Exactly. Saving it to an app like Pocket allows you to basically say, okay, interesting, but not now.
Yeah.
You can then revisit it later, maybe during a designated reading time or commute. It prevents you from getting sidetracked in the moment and falling into those endless clicking spirals.
Keeps you on task. And finally, in this section, he touches on the often challenging task of curating our social media feeds.
Yeah, that can feel like a constant battle against the algorithms designed to keep us scrolling. But being intentional about who you follow and the type of content you allow into your feed can make a significant difference.
How so?
Well, consciously unfollowing accounts that tend to post, say, clickbait or overly inflammatory stuff, or just things that consistently trigger that impulsive, mindless engagement doing that can help minimize the distractions and create a more maybe mindful and less reactive online experience. You curate your inputs.
Taking control of the stream. Okay, so we've learned how to understand our internal drives, structure our time proactively for traction, and minimize those external interruptions. That brings us to the final component of Eyal's model, preventing distraction through the use of packs. This sounds like adding another layer of commitment to our intentions.
That's precisely the idea, yeah. Pacts, or pre-commitments as they're sometimes called, are basically strategies we can implement ahead of time to make it more difficult to get distracted later on.
How do they do that?
Usually by setting up some kind of consequence for getting distracted or by increasing the effort required to actually deviate from our chosen path. They essentially add a layer of accountability, either to ourselves or others.
Okay. He talks about the power of making our goals public, right? How does telling other people help us stay focused?
Yeah, this falls under what he calls effort pacts. By publicly stating your intentions, I'm going to finish this draft by Friday, or I'm running 10K next month. You create this sense of social accountability. You don't want to let people down or look like you failed.
Right, the social pressure.
Exactly. And Eyal himself used this principle very powerfully when he was writing Indistractable. He actually made a significant financial commitment. I think it was $10,000 to a friend. He promised he would pay his friend that money if he didn't finish the book manuscript by a specific agreed-upon deadline.
Wow, $10,000. That is definitely a strong incentive not to procrastinate.
You bet. The potential financial cost served as a very powerful external motivator for him to stay focused and avoid those tempting distractions. That's an extreme example, but the principle holds.
He also mentions other ways we can use these effort packs, right?
Yeah.
Beyond just public declarations or massive bets, ways to increase friction.
Yes, absolutely. These often involve increasing the practical difficulty, the friction, of accessing common distractions. Think about apps like Forest or Freedom.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
The ones that block websites or lock your phone.
Exactly. Forest, for example, essentially grows a virtual tree on your phone screen while you're trying to concentrate for a set period. If you give in and unlock your phone to check social media before the time is up, your little virtual tree dies.
Oh no, poor tree.
It sounds silly, but that small, tangible disincentive killing the tree can actually be enough to make you pause and resist the urge. It adds just enough friction.
Okay, so effort packs make it harder to get distracted. And then there are price packs, which sound like they work on a similar principle to his big $10,000 commitment.
Exactly. Price packs involve attaching a more direct, tangible financial cost to succumbing to distraction. So maybe someone working on a freelance project makes a bet with a friend. I'll pay you $50 if I don't complete this section by end of day Wednesday.
Putting your money where your mouth is.
Pretty much. It's another way to raise the stakes and really reinforce your commitment to staying focused, because now there's a financial penalty for slacking off.
Okay, effort packs, price packs. And finally, he discusses identity packs.
This seems to circle right back to our earlier conversation about how we see ourselves, that indistractable identity.
It does. It ties it all together nicely. An identity pact is essentially about internalizing the belief that you are the kind of person who is focused, who values their attention, and who is in control.
So it's about belief.
It's about cultivating that belief, yes. When you truly adopt this indistractable identity, it starts to naturally influence your behavior. It makes it easier to resist distractions because giving in would feel inconsistent. It would clash with who you believe yourself to be.
Can you give an example? Sure. Think of a manager who consistently communicates to their team. My mornings are for deep focus. Please only interrupt for emergencies. By stating that and then acting on it, by protecting that time, they are reinforcing their own identity as someone committed to focused work. It becomes part of who they are in that context.
I see. So it becomes self-reinforcing.
Exactly.
So just to quickly recap then, we've really explored Nir Eyal's pretty comprehensive four-part framework for becoming indistractable. It starts with understanding and navigating our internal triggers.
That discomfort.
Then intentionally making time for traction, those important activities.
Scheduling your values.
Then strategically minimizing or hacking back those external interruptions.
Taking control of the pings.
And finally, leveraging the power of packs, effort, price, and identity packs to solidify our focus.
And as you can probably tell, Indistractable provides this really rich set of practical, actionable strategies. And they aren't just for work. They can be applied across so many aspects of our lives. Enhancing productivity, sure, but also supporting personal growth, strengthening relationships, even improving how we approach parenting in a distracting world.
Yeah. And the book itself includes some helpful tools, right? Like templates.
It does. He includes things like a template for creating a personalized time-boxed schedule and another one for tracking your individual distraction patterns, which links back to understanding those internal triggers we talked about at the start. Very practical stuff.
Now, it's also probably fair to acknowledge, like with many popular books, that Indistractable has received some criticism too.
That's true, yeah.
Some readers have found certain parts maybe a bit repetitive, perhaps, or felt that it maybe oversimplifies some of the really complex psychological factors involved in attention and especially technology use.
That's a fair point some have raised. Others have noted that the tone can occasionally feel a little bit prescriptive, maybe even a touch like blaming the victim at times, and that perhaps it understates the genuinely addictive, powerful design of some modern technologies and platforms. It's not always just about individual willpower.
Right. Those are definitely valid points to keep in mind as you, the listener, engage with this material, read the book yourself. Context is important.
Absolutely. It's always valuable to approach any resource, any framework with a critical eye and consider different perspectives and the bigger picture. However, even with those points of discussion, I think Indistractable offers a really useful and crucially actionable framework for anyone who feels overwhelmed by the constant barrage of distractions today, anyone seeking to regain greater control over their attention and ultimately their lives.
And that really brings us right back to you, our listener, the person we call the learner. By understanding these ideas, and more importantly, by actively experimenting with and applying these strategies, you really can become more effective in your pursuit of knowledge. You can achieve your goals with greater intention, and ultimately, hopefully, experience less of that frustrating feeling of being constantly pulled in a million directions at once.
So, building on that, here's maybe a final thought for you to consider this week. A little experiment. Think about one specific internal trigger that you notice frequently pops up for you. Perhaps it's that feeling of restlessness when you sit down to study, or maybe the urge to procrastinate when faced with a particularly challenging task.
Okay, identify one trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this week, just make a conscious effort to observe that trigger when it arises. Don't try to fix it immediately. Don't automatically act on the urge to distract yourself. Just notice it. What does it actually feel like in your body? What thoughts come along with it? See if you can just sit with that feeling for a moment, maybe just 10 seconds longer than usual, without automatically reaching for your phone or opening a new tab.
Just observe it with curiosity, like you said earlier.
Exactly. That simple act of mindful observation, of creating that tiny gap between the trigger and your usual reaction, can be an incredibly powerful first step in starting to reclaim your attentional control. Give it a try.